Hello, this is going to be the week 3 reading section for Activate this spring. This passage is really tiny, just like the past 2 weeks, so I'm going to try to read it to you in its entirety. I know that will take a minute, but I think it's worth it. Sometimes if there are words that are novel to you, meaning they're new, they're different, sometimes it helps to just hear them pronounced, and sometimes for the flow of the overall passage and trying to look for context clues, it helps to read it aloud. So this is Humanities passage. It tells you up at the top. That can mean a lot of different things. In this context, basically, it's just sort of a review of a book, but it's more than just a review saying it was a good book or a bad book, thumbs up, thumbs down. It is saying kind of a little bit about the effect that the book had overall, long term, basically. So this little article was written in 2000, and it's a book describing a book called Looking Backward that was published way back in 1888. So it says, on Memorial Day in 1887, Julian West, one of the best-known Americans of his day and a notorious insomniac, sought help for his chronic sleep problems. In the course of his treatment by a Boston doctor, however, West was mesmerized so effectively that he never regained consciousness. He has remained in a state of suspended animation for more than 100 years. This September, it is all but certain that West will awaken from his slumber and be brought back to life. To be sure, this amazing triumph is not a scientific marvel, but a literary one. West is the protagonist of Edward Bellamy's best-selling utopian novel, Looking Backward, 2000 to 1887. In the book, September 10, 2000, is the precise day West rouses from his long nap. Perhaps the most famous time traveler in literary history, West has had a powerful and enduring effect on the terms of American political debate. Published in 1888, Looking Backward crystallized that combination of suspicion of markets and love of centralized planning that has, in various forms, persisted to this day. As West starts to wrestle in his bed, it is well worth revisiting Looking Backward and teasing out the ways in which it continues to influence contemporary times. So this gives you a little background about who this character is, but then the two big things that were influential from the book on people who read the book. So they mentioned the first being suspicion of markets, like free market economy, what we would normally call capitalism, and then love of centralized planning, like having your society planned out. And they mean more than just like planning roads or planning how government will work, but it'll explain both of those things and how it had an effect. Bellamy's vision of a future without capitalism proved immensely appealing. It took the massive hit novel Ben-Hur from 1880 7 years to rack up sales that Looking Backward tallied in just 2. By the early 1890s, more than 150 Bellamy clubs devoted to discussing and implementing the ideas in Looking Backward had sprung up in cities across the United States. Translated into 20 foreign languages, the novel was a hot topic among the intelligentsia in pre-revolutionary Russia. Lenin's wife gave it a mixed review. And the architects of the New Deal, Arthur Morgan, the first head of the Tennessee Valley Authority, wrote a gushing 400-page biography of Bellamy. By the early 30s, that would be 1930s, Bellamy's fans had been absorbed into American socialist circles and Franklin Roosevelt's brain trust. Both John Dewey and the historian Charles Beard announced that among books published in the preceding 50 years, Looking Backward was matched in influence only by Das Kapital. They meant it as a compliment. Bellamy's legacy is surprisingly robust. His novel gave socialism a new audience among America's middle classes. Before the novel was published, the educated and elite in America tended to associate the word socialism with a word like tuberculosis, both rippled with sinister hints of strange sexual liberties. Well aware of such prejudices, Bellamy concocted a future that is in every respect socialist, but from which the word socialism has been banned. While Americans still tend not to like the sound of this word, Bellamy's readers discovered that they were very fond of the thing. More than any other book, Looking Backwards made it respectable for a time to talk about implementing straightforwardly socialist schemes in the United States. So what they mean is that word socialism has a lot of prejudice attached to it and a lot of negative ideas, kind of saying that the normal people, the middle class, should do the ruling and we should care more about society than just caring more about our individual selves and getting rich ourselves. But politically, a lot of people don't like that idea because then later on it became associated with communism and Russia and China and all that kind of stuff. So they like the ideas, but they don't really like all the associations and connotations with that word. Today, of course, few in the mainstream are attracted to Bellamy's kind of authoritarian socialism. What then survives today of looking backwards outmoded vision? Bellamy's chief legacy relates to his emotional attachment to planning as a good in and of itself. A rational devotion to the inherent rightness of large-scale planning is one of the chief features of the 20th century mind. And although Bellamy certainly was not the first to feel this devotion, it is an ancient faith, he was one of those who helped to give this faith its recognizably modern form. Along with many others, Bellamy laid the foundations for what could be called our planning culture. Of course, to say that a preference for planning, like a preference for curry or baseball, has something to do with culture is already to resist the ideology of the plan. The plan must almost of necessity present itself as something beyond culture. The plan is rational, whereas culture is a messy, unorganized, because unplanned, tangle of prejudices. The idea that a firewall insulates the plan from anything like a cultural prejudice is perhaps the fundamental fallacy trumpeted by planners. It might be well to ask just what aspects of the prejudice in favor of planning are most immune to counter-arguments based upon reason. Bellamy's Looking Backward is a good place to look for clues, since it is not clear that the book appealed to readers because of its passages laying out Bellamy's bizarre economic pensées. At one point, for instance, he suggests that competitive entrepreneurship hinders innovation while bureaucracy fosters it. Indeed, when Bellamy brought out a fat sequel that laid out his economic musings in a more apparently systematic form, it laid an egg, which means it didn't go over well. Nobody bought that second book. It may be, in fact, that the appeal of Looking Backward depended more on aesthetics than economics. Bellamy, in common with other planners, justifies his plans at least partially on aesthetic grounds. Utopian planners concern themselves with whole societies, or for the more humble, just whole cities, that are far too complex to be fully present in all of their details to an individual mind. In other words, no matter how full an account of such a society or city is given, it cannot constitute a unified object of knowledge. Such wholes can, however, be grasped aesthetically, just as one can experience aesthetic satisfaction when contemplating, say, the whole of Middlemarch without having all its details before one's mind at the same time. And Middlemarch is like a pretty famous old-school novel that's really, really huge. Okay, now that we have read the whole thing in its tiny, tiny entirety, let's look at the actual questions. So question 1 says, which of the following best describes the primary function of the first and second paragraphs? So lines 1 through 21 of the passage. So it doesn't give a brief summary of everything in the novel. It doesn't even tell really any of the rest of the novel. It just gives you some exposition. B says it suggests that the passage is divided into 2 major parts, one focused on realistic parts and one on personal vision of the future. Nope, that's not even mentioned in the first 2 paragraphs. Down here at D, it says they reveal the author's theme, which it doesn't say anything about. So I can mark out A, B, and D. The correct answer is C. They introduced Looking Backward in a way meant to spur readers' curiosity about the influence of a 19th century fictional character, Julian West, on modern-day America. So it kind of gives you that, like, oh, he fell asleep, Rip Van Winkle, what does he wake up and find out? That kind of thing. So the right answer is C. For number 2, it says the author refers to socialism as the thing, line 64, because, we already talked about this, it's kind of taken that concept and making it more neutral, so it's not objectionable. People don't object to it and hate it. It definitely was not an obscenity. It was not a cuss word. Maybe C kind of a little bit makes sense. He doesn't think that America's upper classes would want to read anything about like the middle class, you know, sharing the wealth type people that much. So maybe. And then D says looking backward secretly embrace socialist principles. I think it's pretty open. It's none of that secret. So probably the best answer is A, that neutral term, so it wouldn't be objectionable, that part. For number 3, it says references to the architects of the New Deal in line 41 and Franklin Roosevelt's Brain Trust, line 46 through 47, and that is over here, are intended to, and so the first one talks about socialist schemes becoming a respectable activity. Well, we know that's not right because we just talked about socialism not being a great word back then. Accounting for the growth of Bellamy fan clubs, no. Unless you know some history, architects of the New Deal and Franklin Roosevelt's Brain Trust, that's just a few people. That doesn't talk about growth of fan clubs. This one explains why this guy wrote a 400-page biography of the author of this novel. Well, no, that doesn't have anything to do with that. So really the answer is C. Gives examples of why the effect of looking backward had an effect there on American policies and politics. So New Deal and Franklin Roosevelt, he was a president, so coming up with like political ideas has to do with the president. So number 4 says, based on the passage, which of the following is the most valid statement about large-scale social planning? So we're looking at these last few paragraphs here that talk about planning. If you look at lines 72 to 79, right in here, it talks about planning and the devotion to planning. It is an ancient faith. So the only thing that goes with ancient faith here is letter J. It is a process that planners have relied on for many centuries. So many centuries, ancient, that seems to go together. And then number 5 says, when the author of the passage says that Julian West has had a powerful and enduring effect on the terms of American political debate in lines 19 and 21 there, he most likely means, so you got to think about what powerful and enduring means, and they're referencing these couple lines here in the second paragraph, but it's kind of talking about overall the thing with socialism and the thing with planning. So if you look at the answers, political controversy, no, it didn't do that. A character that changed America's political values, no, I don't think it was the character. So really the best answer, just kind of as overall looking at the passage, just general, looking backward has helped shape the political beliefs of many Americans. So there you go. Letter B is probably the best. So again, if you look through here, for number 1, you want C, 2A, 3C, 4J, and 5B. Have a great week.